Hey everyone, today I want to talk about the ownership experience of my Advantage 4-post lift. Now, I purchased this lift a couple of years ago for the primary reason of storing a third vehicle in my garage. I have done some maintenance on this lift, but at the time I already had two vehicles in here and I was in the market for my GT500, so I knew I needed a storage lift to put a third vehicle in this garage. Now, when I initially got this lift, I did a video going into depth why I purchased it, all basically the features and aspects, but the primary reason was this lift is ALI certified, the Automotive Lift Institute that basically does third-party independent testing that proves that this lift meets or exceeds the industry standards for safety. And the other reason was that this utilizes the newer box-style sliders for the lift itself. A lot of other lifts utilize a C-channel where the locks are either one welded piece from a ladder-style locking system or it has tabs welded on for the locks. With this is one piece of steel square tubing, and the only metal that is removed from the posts are the cutouts for the locks themselves. So nothing's welded on, it's just the cutout. So I think this is a much stronger setup. And because of the way this is oriented, having this slide on the exterior of the post, it makes this very stiff and strong. I had looked at a lot of other lifts in person, especially the C-channel styles. They tended to have a lot of sway, a surprising amount of sway, some of them, especially when the weight was up high, versus this, no matter how hard I hit this thing or push it, it doesn't sway at all. It is very stiff and very solid. So that was the main reasons why I went with this lift. And I'll get into some of the pros and cons of this lift a little bit later in the video. Now, this model specifically is the DX9000HD. This is the smallest lift that Advantage makes. This is really good for somebody who is really concerned with the overall dimensions of the lift. Whether you have a one-car, two-car garage and you're worried about the lift kind of taking over the garage and making it really claustrophobic or very cramped in the garage. Now, this garage specifically, it's a two-car garage, obviously. It's 24 by 24 and the ceiling's about 10 feet 9 inches tall. So despite having this lift in here, I have my Raptor in here normally on the other side, and some of the other stuff I'd have in here, like the cabinets, it doesn't feel cramped or claustrophobic in here. The cabinets stick out about 2 feet from the wall, so I can still comfortably walk around. I can walk into my room in the back, I can walk past the cars, I can open up the cabinet and go in them, I can look in them, and I still have plenty of room right here. So that's one of the things that I liked about this lift, was pretty good dimensions overall. You can fit a pretty good sized vehicle on here, but it doesn't overtake the garage where you're really shimmying to get around. When the Raptor's in here, I can comfortably open up the passenger door to get in and out of it. I do have the lift offset a little bit. These hinges are the center of the door, and I have this offset by about a foot to the side. So overall, not bad. I was initially worried until I started taking measurements, but it fits in here very, very well. It really, though it is a big item in the garage, it doesn't overwhelm the garage itself. So that's one of the things that I really liked about this lift. Now, I did have Advantage deliver and install this. It took them about 6 hours. They brought it in on a flatbed. The lift itself weighs over 2,000 pounds. The setup went relatively smooth, no real issues with the setup itself. Obviously, they set it up in the garage, and then we just basically moved it to where it needed to go. Now, this lift is not bolted to the ground. It does come with the holes pre-drilled into place if you want to bolt it to the ground. It's probably a good idea to bolt it to the ground if you have it in a place, especially a place that is earthquake prone. But what's nice about this lift is it comes with a set of casters so you can move it around. When I initially had them finish the lift, I moved it just a little bit around to get it into the exact spot where I got it. So that was really nice, having the caster kit, having the ability to move it around, especially if you have it in some place that is bigger, like a shop where you might reconfigure things over time. It's nice to have it. I can also wheel this thing outside if I ever want to do something in the garage and this is in the way. It can easily be wheeled outside. Now, you can't move the lift with a car on it. You have to have everything off of it. The casters get mounted onto the very bottoms of the post, and the weight of the lift all the way down causes it to cantilever, and it will pick the corners up, and you can just move it around. One person can move this with no weight on it. It's very simple. Two people is a lot easier. You can steer with one person and push with the other person, but like I said, you can't do it with a car on. It's not designed for that. It's too heavy, and I've seen people try it. It doesn't work. It's too much weight to do that. So you can't move it with a car, but Unloaded, very easy to move this thing around. So that's what's nice about having the caster kit. If you don't want to bolt to the ground, you do have the option to move it when and where you want to. So when I moved it over, I had it set in the spot it is now. I did have to do a little bit of tweaking with the locks themselves. Now that's probably a combination of concrete floors are almost never perfect. There's always little imperfections and different heights in the floor themselves. And I'm sure that the cables started to stretch a little bit after I started to use it. It comes with 4 steel braided cables. The 4 of them combined are rated for 90,000 pounds. And the lift itself is rated for 9,000 pounds. So this is a lot of really overbuilt design aspects into this lift. That's what I liked about it. But steel cables are going to stretch. Steel braided cables are just, no matter how thick or strong they are, they're going to stretch a little bit over time as you put weight on them. So I knew that the locks were a little bit off once I started to use it, because you want to make sure really that all 4 locks fire at the exact same time. You don't want one slow or late, you know, a little bit later than the other ones. You want to make sure they're all firing at the same time. So as it starts to come up, they deploy. You don't want the lift to be crooked at all when you bring it back down if one of them hasn't deployed yet. So I figured, all right, rather than me having to try to chase the locks being out of adjustment constantly from the cable stretching over time, I didn't have the 500 at the time. I had the 350R. So I put the 350R on and I brought it all the way down, and then I brought it up about an inch. So, and I let it sit there for about a day. So it was basically almost all the way down, but it wasn't on the locks. It was hanging from the cables just to stretch all the cables out. So I wasn't constantly having to readjust them while they continually broke in. So I did that for about a day, and that pretty much fixed the issue. After I did it that initial time, I readjusted the locks. They were pretty much good from there. So I didn't have to keep chasing the locks being out of adjustment after that. And that worked really well for that. And since then, I haven't had to adjust anything else. Now, this was my first lift, so there was a little bit of getting used to it. It's a little nerve-wracking the first couple times you use it, really getting oriented about how the car is going to react going on and off, if you're making sure you're okay side to side. But I've been on and off this lift probably a couple of dozen times at least, and now I'm very comfortable with it. The one aspect that modern cars make a lot easier for this lift is having a backup camera. I always have the upper car backed in, because with the ceilings being a little bit on the lower side in here, and having, when the door is up, I have more clearance to go higher if I back the upper car in. So having the backup camera makes it really simple. I can back the car on very evenly. My margin of error is usually about an inch or so either way from being perfectly centered. So I've got it down pat. I'm very comfortable with it, but that backup camera makes it a heck of a lot easier. The mirrors, you can only really see so much from the mirrors, but that backup camera gives a good view, especially if it projects on the image where the car is going to be going. It makes it a heck of a lot easier having a backup camera. But it's like anything else, when it's new and you've never used it before, you got to get used to it. So just take your time. Go slow. A spotter the first couple times makes it a little bit easier until you really get comfortable and get oriented yourself as to what it feels like and how it's going to go when you put the car on the lift when you're by yourself. So the operations of the lift itself is really simple, like most lifts. It has one power button to power the hydraulic unit to bring it up. It has one release lever to let the hydraulic fluid out of it and let it come back down. And then it has one mechanical lever for all 4 locks. So a really simple operation. One person can utilize this lift with no issue. Obviously it's designed for that, but it's a very, very simple operation. There's only really the 3 controls for this thing, and that's mainly it. It's a 110 volt motor. They recommend 20 amp circuit. I think you can get away with a 15 because it only draws 1.5 horsepower, so you'd probably be okay with a 15, which I think is way better than having to run a 220, because most people aren't set up for a 220, so you'd probably have to do more electrical work to get it operational, so I didn't have to do that. That was really nice. It's 2 minutes all the way up, 30 seconds down, so it's not the fastest, but for most people using this for residential storage, I think that's perfectly fine. It's worth it being a tiny bit slower than a 220 volt system and having to wait a few extra seconds and having to run all the extra electrical to get it operational. So it's not that slow. I did a video where I showed it in real time, but it's not that bad. It doesn't bother me at all. I'm just waiting the extra minute for it to go up for not having to do the electrical work to get it to run. And the overall feel of this lift is very solid. It has heavy plating throughout the entire lift. This is a lot better than some of the other lifts that I was looking at. And like I was talking about before, it doesn't have any sway to it. Overall, a very solid lift. The lift itself weighs over 2,000 pounds, so it's very solid, very sturdy. It doesn't move around. It doesn't feel flimsy in any way. Everything that needs to be heavy duty is very heavy duty on this lift. Now, some of the standard accessories that came with this. Came with the caster kit I talked about, so you can wheel it around if you want to, or bolts to the ground, whatever you want to do. I have them hanging up in the back, a real heavy duty set of casters. Came with a set of 36-inch aluminum ramps. So they're nice and lightweight, you can move them around. It's a lot better than steel ramps or steel ramps that are built into the lifts. So real easy to just move them, put them where you want. You can store them actually on the lift themselves in the rails that are built into it, that are also for the jack tray that it comes with. The jack tray, I believe, is rated for 4,000 pounds. Basically a little tray that goes in the center so you can put bottle jacks on if you want to lift the car up when it's on the lift. I don't have my jack tray on. I don't utilize that, so I just like having a nice clean underneath. I put that and stored it away. It also came with 4 drip trays. They're just plastic. Again, they sit on those rails in between the runways, just like the jacking tray would. I don't have them on, but if you have a car that leaks fluid, it's good to have them on there so it doesn't leak to the car underneath. I leave all that stuff off so it's clear underneath the cars. I can inspect under the cars very easily, and if I'm doing maintenance on it, I don't have to move anything out of the way. So if I need them, they're there, but I don't need them, but they are standard accessory if that's something that you are concerned about or looking to have. And then it also came with a set of 2 rubber wheel chocks. So whenever I have the car on the upper part, I chalk both sides of the wheel as an extra safety margin. And that was pretty much all the accessories that the lift came with. Now, I did add on a widening kit. That was an accessory that I added that did not come with this. Now, this is something that the Advantage does not advertise, but if you ask them, they will build it for you. The issue that I found with a lot of lifts, especially smaller ones, is they're not really wide enough. A lot of cars, as they have gotten wider and wider, are a little bit on the narrow side for a lot of these lifts. A lot of lifts I found were in the mid to low 70-inch wide range, and it's to the point where the tires are almost over the edge on each side when the car is perfectly centered. The tires themselves, the weight of the vehicle is on, but the tires, the bulge of the tires kind of overhangs. So without it, it's kind of hard to see the edges. You can't really see the edges of the ramps when you're backing on because a lot of modern cars have basically axles and tire setups that are so wide. It's just not enough. So that's why I went with the widening kit. The car doesn't really sit on it, but I like that extra margin of error, and I can use it as a guide when I'm backing on as well. This lift itself was 75 inches wide stock before I had them add the widening kit onto it. With the widening kit, which is basically just a piece of steel angle iron, it's really nothing too complex. You can easily do it yourself. It bumped it up to 83 inches. So I picked up a considerable amount of width. Basically, I have a 4-inch margin of error on both sides now, so I think this is a much safer way to go. It wasn't too expensive to have them add this on. You can get this from a steel supplier and add the angle iron on yourself. You can see on the edge here, they put 3 bolts in. I added 2 more, and I upgraded the hardware. I put grade 8 hardware in. The hardware that they put on was a little cheap, so grade 8 bolts, 5 of them. More than enough to hold this, and that doesn't really hold the weight. The weight of it is held on the edges here, so the weight of it is held. It basically uses the same support here that the runways themselves use. So the main weight of it is here, and those 5 bolts basically just hold it in place. Widening kits, I've seen some people do them. Great idea. Like I said, so many cars are getting wider nowadays that you almost need, they kind of need to start designing these lifts to accommodate a little bit of a wider vehicle. But that was the main accessory that I added on because I wanted that margin of error for safety there. And I also added just a simple threaded on handle extension that they sell. Good for if you're shorter or if you have a really tall lift. So basically, because typically it's just one lever that comes out with a ball on the end. This allows it to hang down. I'll show a picture of it. So if you're short, you can really grab it. Also, I use it when I'm bringing the lift all the way down and I want to hold the lock. So when I'm bending over, holding the release lever, I can reach hold the locks. So it's a little bit easier to do that. You could also do it with your foot if you didn't have the extension on there. So a little bit easier. That's just a real basic, inexpensive accessory. But the widening kit is definitely a good thing to look into. Like I said, they don't advertise it, but they do offer it. Just a simple piece of L-shaped angle iron bolted on. That's really all it is. So now the maintenance on this lift is pretty simple. There's really not a ton of stuff to do to it. Obviously, you want to do your visual inspections. Look for anything that's cracked or broken. Look for leaks from the hydraulic system. Just like doing an inspection on anything, a good visual inspection can always yield some issues. You want to check, make sure there's no issues with the cables, nothing's binding, nothing's jammed into the cables, nothing's frayed, stuff like that going around it. Maintenance I do on this, I wax the sliders. They recommend doing that. I just used a basic paste wax. I wax the sliders all the way around, so that's less resistance that the sliders have when they're going up and down on the posts. So it goes up and down it nice and smooth and clean. And it also helps keep the post from getting dirty over time. It has grease fittings for all of the pulleys for the bushings. Real simple, just walk around. There's 8 of them, I think, total, 1 for each of the pulleys. And then underneath, there's some on each end for the hydraulic unit. So that's real simple, just grease fittings. That only takes a couple of minutes to go around and do. Usually once or twice a year I do that. That's real simple. That's not an issue with doing that. And then I also check the locks. The locks, you usually know if they're out of adjustment, because when you're bringing it up and down, if you hear them fire unevenly, that's how you know you need to readjust them. But I just check them periodically. I also make sure sometimes when it's in the up position, I'll make sure that the locks are at the same position. But usually if they're off, you're going to hear they're firing out of order. So you should have a nice solid audio of the lock slamming into place when the lift is going up. So that's the maintenance on the lift, not a ton to it. Just keep an eye on everything since there's a lot of weight on this thing and it's holding some really expensive vehicles. All right, pros and cons. Pros, overall dimensions of this lift. When I was in the market for a lift, I was looking at, that was one of the main things I started looking at was the dimensions of the lift. A lot of other lifts I looked at were overall a bigger lift, like a little bit wider, a little bit longer, and the runways were narrower. That was one of the really big brands that I looked at. They had this style lift, same weight capacity, same setup, box style sliders, ALI certified. Aside from the fact it was a lot more money, it was a wider lift with narrow runways. That was like 72 inches. So I'm like, oh geez, the tires are definitely gonna overhang that thing. So that was out. But the overall dimensions of this lift were really, really good. It fits a pretty substantial sized vehicle on here with taking up probably the smallest footprint you could reasonably take up for this size. So that was good about this lift. The mechanical locks on this thing. A lot of lifts utilize pneumatic locks, meaning you have to have an air compressor hooked up to release the locks to bring it back down. But you're going to be chasing air leaks with that. If it doesn't work, if there's a problem with the compressor or something. Mechanical is just easier than pneumatic in this situation. Yes, you might have to adjust these once in a while, but I think this is a much simpler way to go. One lever releases all 4 locks. Really simple, real basic. Just make sure everything's adjusted and you should be perfectly fine with that. And it's not hard to adjust them if you need to adjust them. I did a couple times and it only takes a few minutes just to really tweak them and get them absolutely perfect. 110 volts, like I said before, you're not running a 120 to this thing. Some of the bigger lifts do take 120. Some of the large ones that they make, they do take 220. Some of the large ones that they make, these take 110. Perfect, no electrical work needed. Your regular outlet should be fine for making this thing operational. I can deal with it being a tiny bit slower for not having to do all that extra electrical plumbing to get this thing working. Bushings in the pulleys instead of bearings. Other manufacturers, I've heard people complain about bearing failures in their pulley systems. This uses bushings just like heavy earth moving equipment uses, like bulldozers and backhoes. On all those heavy pivot points that you always see grease hanging out of, those utilize bushings instead of bearings. So that's just one piece of metal that is not going to fail because it doesn't have the complexity that a bearing has in it. Like I said before, high weight rating, 9,000 pounds this thing is rated for. I've seen a lot of other lifts that are this similar dimensions, 6,000, 7,000 pounds, 9,000 pounds, big margin of error. The heaviest car I've had on here was 5,300 pounds. I had a pickup truck on here once. But the cars weigh about, this one's a little over 4,000, this is a little under 4,000 pounds. So I like that big margin of error with a lot of heavy steel throughout this thing. So I always want to have more margin of error having expensive cars on this. And like I was talking about before, the cables are 22,500 pounds each, 90,000 pounds combined. So very heavy weight rating on this thing. And I'm sure they designed this to be much stronger than it really needs to be. The paint's held up pretty well. A couple little imperfections in the paint when I got little scratches and a couple little chips. Just having this much heavy steel, shipping it, you're going to get some imperfections in the paint, some little chips in it. But the paint's held up well. I haven't had any other issues with the paint other than some of the scratches that it kind of came with. But Not that bad. That's held up very well. Being able to move or mount this thing, having the option with it. Some people have gotten very upset that I haven't mounted this thing to the floor, but like I said, it really depends, I think, on where you live. But it's nice having the option to do what you want. You want to move it around, it comes with the casters, you can move it around. You want to mount it to the ground, it's pre-drilled, you can mount it. You have the option for what you want to do. You don't have to pick and choose. It's set up for whatever you decide to do. And then finally, what I was talking about before, all the heavy plating on this thing, everything from the base plates, the tabs for the locks themselves. Advantage did a lot of videos on their YouTube channel and on their website discussing really in depth, and I also talked about that in my video, about the very, very heavy plating they use throughout this thing. They didn't skimp on anything. This is all heavy steel throughout this thing. Some of the other lifts that I have seen, they kind of cut corners in places, like the base plates will be kind of thin and flimsy, and they'll start to kind of bow over time, or when they weld them, they'll bow. Not these. There's a lot of heavy plating throughout this entire thing. I think they didn't skimp. I didn't see any places they skimped on this thing, especially in the places where having thicker steel really matters. All right, cons. Two main complaints or really issues that I had with this lift. The number one issue I had with this lift was that you are not able to lock the ramps onto the lift themselves. Some lifts, the ramps are sort of built into it, and they'll utilize a long pin to hold it in. Those are kind of a pain, because if you have a lower vehicle like this, I know some people that have had lifts like this, every time they want to take a vehicle on and off the top, they have to get the ramp back, they got to push the pin in, put it down, and when they want to put a car on the bottom, they have to take it out so they can drive it in. Those are a pain. I don't like lifts like that. For service lifts, I think that's fine. For storage lifts, that's a pain, having to constantly take the pins in and out for ramps that are designed to be on it all the time. A lot of older style lifts, and especially the older Advantage lifts, the ramps would actually hook on to the front because they didn't have these flappers on there. So you would basically drop the end of the ramp on, and it would hold on itself. The issue with this one is these come now with these automatic flappers. The idea behind these things is whenever the lift comes off the ground, these automatically deploy. So if you forget to put the car in park or set the parking brake, the car can't roll off the lift once it's up. This is designed to essentially act as a bridge. So essentially the ramp would go under here. So you basically would drive the car over the ramp, over this flapper, and then as soon as it comes off the ground, you have a wheel stop. You can't directly mount this the way it's oriented. So the ramp itself is not locked into the lift. I had a close call with this lift. I am very careful when I back this on. When they initially put the lift together, when this thing was all the way down, the ramp had a tiny, tiny bit of teeter to, and I wasn't fully comfortable with that, and they said that that's normal. Well, once I pre-stretched the cables, that was gone. So when I would put the lift all the way down, this thing was locked. You see this has a little bit of a downward slope to it. When this was all the way down, the ramp was underneath it, you could not move this flapper. It was rock solid. I tried pulling the ramp out, wouldn't come out, wouldn't budge. I'm like, okay, then that should be fine then, because nothing is moving. There's no flex, there's no sway, there's no teeter. Everything is locked in. Well, somehow, some way, one of the ramps moved on me when I was backing on. I am very careful when I bring these cars on and off, especially when I'm backing them on. I go very slow, minimal throttle inputs, and somehow one of the ramps moved on me. I got lucky, I didn't have a problem, but it could have been a mess. It could have been a disaster. And that was the main issue I had with this. I kind of brought that up when they installed it and basically said that they don't move, but well, it moved on me. So their solution when I spoke to them about it was basically take this flapper off, you can unbolt this, flip it around, and then you would leave the flapper off, and then it would, the edge of the ramp would drop in and lock in place. I didn't really want to do that, take it apart, and then lose the flapper itself, so I came up with a real simple solution on the front of it. I basically just put the ramp on the ground the way it normally was. I brought the lift all the way down, lined it up exactly how I wanted it to be, and I drilled a hole through this flapper, I drilled a hole through the ramp, and I put a big, heavy steel Lynch pin into that. So now that will never, ever move again. Real simple. It's got the big ring on it, Lynch pin, so it's easy to pull in and out when it's down. The holes line up real nicely. I have marks on the ground so I can line up in the exact same spot every time. But that Lynch pin, that's heavy steel Lynch pin, will guarantee it'll never move on me again. And I took it over to my wire wheel on my grinder and I smoothed out any kind of sharp edges on the head of it. So now it's locked in. That will never, ever work its way out on me again. I don't know how it did the first time because it was locked down tight the first time, but that steel pin will never, ever allow it to slide out ever again. So that was the only issue I had with this lift, is that there was no way to lock it in, and it could have been a problem, but thank God it wasn't. So that's the main con that I saw with this lift, that if you have one of these, you might want to think about basically doing what I did. It was a cheap, inexpensive, simple solution that could avoid a major problem. And the other really con with this was what I talked about before, was having to add the widening kit onto it, because a lot of these lifts now, they need to be wider to accommodate modern cars that are very wide now. They have a XLT version of this lift, the DX9000XLT. It is a slightly wider, much longer version of this lift that's better designed for bigger vehicles, SUVs, trucks, because it goes up higher so you can get bigger vehicles underneath it. That has a setting on it where you can set the runways to 75 or 79 inches wide. I wish they did that with this lift too, where you could set it on the wider setting. You only have 75 available on this, and then if you need wider, you put a widening kit on it like I did. So those are the only real two cons that I had with this lift. Other than that, it's been a very solid lift. Overall, this is a really good, solid, well-built lift at a very reasonable price. It's pretty much on par with a lot of the other big manufacturers, and I would definitely buy this lift again. But like I said, the only two cons you might have to contend with are the ones I just went over. I would put a pin in it just to make sure you don't have to worry about the ramp moving on you, and just possibly a widening kit depending on how wide of a vehicle you're looking to store. But like I said, overall, a really good solid lift that I would definitely buy again if I needed to get another 4-post lift. So I hope you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching.